Thanks. Appreciate it. Good morning, UVF. How are you today? Good. You seem good. I need to get close enough to my iPad so it recognizes my face. I did that. Being 6'8" comes with its disadvantages. Hey, thanks so much for having me. To President Kim, thank you so much for having me. To those watching in other rooms, I just got over COVID, so you would have been safe from me, but I get it. It is 2022 and 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and we are almost there. Hey, during my time here, when I sat over there every day for chapel, which is where I sat for this chapel, it's just kind of every time I'm here, I'm like, that's where I belong. I moved here over 18 years ago from Buffalo, New York to Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. And I had been married for 9 days, knew nothing, had no money except our wedding money. And I thought that after I finished my time at UVF, VFCC back in the day, I thought I would head back to Buffalo and plant a church or find a job there. And I just want you to know, like, I'm one of those people that never left my college town, and it's been one of the greatest blessings of my life. I'm raising my family here. I get to pastor a great church that I love deeply, get to minister to a lot of people from Valley Forge year in and year out. Students come, students go. But I just want you to know that is a privilege in my life. I never would have believed you if you told me when I was sitting there as a 21-year-old kid that I'd be standing here as a lead pastor of a church in this area, having 4 kids, and still a faithful Buffalo Bills fan, because God is good even in the dark times, and do not worry, joy comes in the morning, because there's been a lot of mourning. So this morning, I want to talk to you about something that's very personal for me. Even though I've preached a version of this message before, don't worry, it was over the summer, you didn't hear it. I believe that God laid this message on my heart for us at UVF today, and I hope you're helped, strengthened, and encouraged by it. And if you're not, that's okay. But let me just ask you a question to get started. How many of us worry? How many of us worry? Yeah, this is, we're honest. How many of us ever get anxious? Get anxious? Yeah, I was anxious a little bit during worship. How many of us ever get afraid? Get afraid? You get afraid? Okay. So this is relevant. That's good news. Somewhere during my teenage years, I began to experience anxiety. I remember my family was going to take a trip to Pittsburgh for the weekend, and for some unexplainable and unwelcome reason, I became very anxious. I ended up staying home from that trip to Pittsburgh, not because there's anything wrong with Pittsburgh, maybe a little bit wrong with Pittsburgh, but not much, just because I didn't feel like traveling because I was afraid. And it was just a 3-hour car ride from Buffalo to Pittsburgh. And then as I moved into adulthood, there have become certain predictable moments when I know I'm going to get anxious. For example, every time I fly somewhere, the whole experience induces anxiety in my life. From the ride down to the Philadelphia airport fighting traffic, to make sure that I get my ticket, to waiting in the security line, to waiting at the gate, to waiting in my seat to take off, knowing I'm not going to fit in the seat on the plane, and then waiting to land. All that waiting makes me anxious. Just to give you an idea of how my mind works and how much anxiety I have, I don't drink soda. If you do, no problem. I don't drink soda. But you know when I drink soda? On a plane. Because I'm like, probably going to die. I'll take a Coke, please. And that's the truth. I only drink Coke on the plane. And then there's one 5 or 6 hour stretch every week that anxiety comes for a visit. Every single week. I can tell it's Sunday morning because I wake up with that old familiar feeling in the pit of my stomach. No matter how relaxed I am on Saturday or how much sleep I get the night before, Sunday mornings are hard for me because of the anxiety. Marked by frequent trips to the bathroom, TMI, I know, just being real, and lots of nervous pacing. This week I did some math. I have preached on a Sunday morning 500 times. You'd expect that somewhere during my 15 years of being a pastor, Sunday stomach, as one of my pastor friends calls it, would have gone away by now. And I'm not anxious about standing in front of people. It's not the fear of public speaking for me. My Sunday morning anxiety is usually connected to the catastrophic thinking I have about everything that can go wrong. What if I get sick? What if I can't do it? What if I let all these people down? I'm not worried about if my message is going to be good. I actually don't care about that. I'm worried about all the possible things that could go wrong. See, so many times, my anxiety and probably your anxiety is connected to our illogical and irrational fears and worries about all that could fall apart in our lives. For some of us, we spend so much time making movies in our head with the title, What If? What if a tragedy happens to a loved one? What if I don't have the money I need to come back next semester? What if I fail an important test? What if I don't find a spouse before I graduate? What if that girl I'm building up the courage to ask out says, no thank you? What if he never asks me out? What if I never get married? What if I never have kids? What if I graduate and can't find a job in my field? What if things never get better in my family? What if I can't make friends? What if I get lonely? What if the Wi-Fi's bad on my next missions trip? What if I don't end up being a star on TikTok? Like, what if? I'm trying to do that pretty soon. I will make $17.5 million on TikTok. I'll let you know when you can start following me. I'm an incredible dancer, as you can see with this frame. Do you know that 97% of what you worry over is not much more than a fearful mind punishing you with exaggerations and misperceptions? Don't misunderstand me. Things absolutely do go wrong in your life, in our lives. Planes crash. People get sick. People who want to get married don't always get married. And life rarely goes smoothly with everything turning out just the way you think it does for others on Instagram. There are certain moments in your life, by the way, where anxiety and fear is appropriate. Like if you see a bear in the woods and you're eating a salmon burger, you should be afraid. If you're a Eagles fan, Patriots fan, Steelers fan, or Giants fan, you should be worried about your future. It's not bright. That was good. But for many of us, the type of anxiety we are dealing with sends our thoughts spiraling, and we stop being rational because our brain's fear networks are in overdrive. We are really good at inventing new things to be worried about. Have you noticed that about you? And here's what I know about anxiety from my own life. If I just stand up here and yell at you, stop worrying, stop being anxious, peace. That was a great message. That's not going to help at all. Because anxiety is connected to our thought patterns, we actually need to be equipped to think new thoughts in the moments we are engulfed by anxiety. If defeating anxiety was as simple as hitting the off switch, we would have done that a long time ago. The battle against anxiety and worry is just that. It's a battle. And every time we feel anxious or overcome by worry, you and I have a choice to make. We can engage in the battle, or we can let it keep us paralyzed and passive. Now, I want to be really clear this morning about what kind of anxiety I'm talking about. I am not talking about the kind of anxiety that is a chronic medical condition related to your brain chemistry. Everyone say, he's not talking about that. I want to encourage you that clinical anxiety needs to be treated by a mental health professional, and it's not unspiritual to see one. This message is not about oversimplifying complex mental health issues. It's about giving us a biblical strategy to fight against all those anxious feelings, worry, and what-if thought patterns all of us encounter somewhere along the way. So this morning I want to answer this question: how do we fight against anxiety? How do we fight against anxiety? What should we do when we are worried and fearful? In the letter of 1 Peter, Peter was writing to Christians who were scattered throughout Asia Minor, or what we know of as modern-day Turkey. These Christians were facing real threats to their health and safety. They were being persecuted for their faith. And in chapter 4 of 1 Peter, Peter calls what these Christians are going through fiery trials. Talk about a legitimate reason for fear and anxiety, right? A fiery trial. Who wants a fiery trial? That makes you nervous. As Peter is concluding his letter, though, listen to what Peter has the audacity to say to people who are suffering. 1 Peter 5, 6, and 7. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. When we look at this text in English, it looks like Peter is saying two unrelated commands. It looks like he says, humble yourself under God's mighty hand, and then he says, cast all your anxiety on him. But what we don't see in English is that this is actually one sentence in Greek. The Greek command is, humble yourself, and cast your anxiety on him is a participle. What does that mean? It means that casting your anxiety on God is showing us how we are to humble ourselves before God. Casting your anxiety on God is showing us how we are to be humble before God. For example, it's like when you were learning to drive. Probably a lot of us know how to drive. Maybe all of us don't. That's okay. But when you were learning to drive, your parents would say things to you like, drive safe, don't look at your phone. Drive safe, obey the speed limit, except if you're on 422. Drive safe, keep your eyes on the road. The command from your parents was, drive safe. The participle is, don't look at your phone. So I want you to think about something. Peter is telling his audience, who is certainly anxious and worried about the circumstances they find themselves in, is that the way they are to fight against anxiety and worry is through being humble. That's surprising, isn't it? I'm surprised that Peter says to anxious, worried people that humility before God is their weapon to fight it. This is a part of the message you're not going to like. Are you ready? What's the opposite of humility? Pride. Worry and anxious thoughts and all of our what ifs feel perfectly justified to us. But what those actually are is a form of pride. New Testament scholar Thomas Schreiner puts it this way: worry is a form of pride because when believers are filled with anxiety, they are convinced that they must solve all the problems in their lives in their own strength. The only God they trust in is themselves. That is a sick burn from Thomas. The only God they trust in is themselves. Like, you understand that when we're all jacked up with worry, pride is operating in our lives. When we are filled with anxiety, God becomes small. There is a direct correlation between our small view of God and the largeness of our pride. What our anxiety and worry reveals to us is that we believe a huge lie. What's the lie all of us believe? I am in control. Some of you might be thinking, wrong, tall preacher. No way. I feel anxious when I feel a loss of control. Exactly. That's because there was a moment in your life when you believed you were in control. Though we don't want to admit it, anxiety and pride, worry and pride are close relatives of one another. We aren't going to be able to win our battle against anxiety until we acknowledge that what is lurking under the surface is an inflated view of ourselves and our own importance. And if you think I'm judging you, just so you know, I started off this message by telling you I struggle with anxiety. Peter's instructions aren't really going to make sense that humility is how we fight anxiety until we acknowledge our tendency to forget God. We are God-forgetting people. We are all prone to wander. You've noticed that about yourself, right? We are all prone to forget God. And what do we do when we forget God? We put ourselves in His place. So if we fight anxiety through humility, here's a question I'm going to close the sermon out answering. How do we humble ourselves before God? How do you, if you're like, okay, you fight anxiety with humility, how do you be humble before God? Good news, Peter tells us right in the text. Here's the first thing you need to do if you want to be humble before God. You need to rest. Ooh, that's good. Someone just told you to rest. You need to relax. Everyone's telling you how fast you need to go, that you're only important if you're going 1,000 miles an hour. No, you need to rest. You need to rest under His mighty hand. The mighty hand of God is an illusion that points to the strength that God exerted when He delivered Israel out of their slavery in Egypt. God's people had been enslaved for over 400 years under the thumb of Pharaoh, and overnight, through His awesome and miraculous power, God brought Israel out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. The mighty hand of God emphasizes the power of God to deliver you. What Peter is telling us to do is to stop trusting in the power we think we have in our own imagination and instead entrust our lives, every detail of it and every worry and every anxious thought underneath the mighty hand of our all-powerful God. Our anxiety is often a message to our bodies, hearts, and minds that we do not believe that God's hand is strong enough to protect us, lead us, and sustain us, even when the worst may happen to us. Whew, that'll preach. See, but when we humble ourselves under the hand of God, we choose to live moment by moment with an utter dependence upon His grace, His mercy, and His strength. So I have a 2-year-old son. You're like, you look a little old to have a 2-year-old. I know. I'm 40, and I have a 2-year-old. So we had 3 kids, and we thought we were done. And then we had a baby. And some people called it a miracle, and I'm like, I know how it happened. I know what happened. This happens every day. People get pregnant. But we were not expecting Ezra. Ezra, my beautiful son, Ezra, the one who keeps me young and laughing and filled with joy. I was playing catch with Ezra last night in my bedroom, and I was having more fun with he is just thinking about the goodness of God in giving me this son. I love Ezra, but you know what? He is a pagan to the core. Man, he needs Jesus. He is so lost. Currently his favorite movie is The Star, which is about the birth of Jesus, and I'm hoping that he'll come to Christ through that. But the thing about Ezra is that he thinks he's a lot wiser and stronger than he actually is, like most 2-year-olds and most 22-year-olds. One of the things Ezra tells us often is, Ezra, do it. We try to help him, and Ezra says, Ezra, do it. And when he says, Ezra, do it, he means he doesn't want my help. Ezra doesn't want help being lifted into his car seat, eating his lunch, or making a basket on our 10-foot rim in our driveway. He's 3 feet tall. It's a good thing that Ezra wants to learn to do things himself. However, sometimes when he obviously can't and we try to help him, he cries or screams in defiance. But here's what's strange about Ezra. Ezra can't get in his car seat without help. Ezra can't eat his lunch without mom and dad helping. And Ezra can't even hit the rim on a 10-foot rim. He has zero chance of making a basket in our driveway. The truth is, when Ezra wants to do these things by himself, he fails miserably. He's a failure. He's got a great dad. But here's the thing. You and I, we're not a lick different. We think we got it covered. You think, I'm in college now, not near my parents anymore, I got this. And some of you, you're like, no, I definitely don't got this, that's why I'm so nervous. You know the truth about you and I? We'll usually look for answers within before we look for comfort and strength from God. It is usually our last resort to look to the Lord. See, we believe this cultural lie that you have to be strong, that you have to be tough, that you have to be in control, that you need to have your act together and everyone needs to think highly of you. But the Lord knows the truth. You're a mess. You're a mess. I'm a mess. 40 years old, still find myself thinking, I got this. Been following Jesus since I was 6. Been pastoring since I was 25. We are slow to learn this lesson. We are slow, listen to this, we are slow to rest under the mighty hand of God. You know what we need? You know what will alleviate our anxieties and our worries? Surrender. Surrender. About every little detail of our lives. Some of you are like, I'm surrendered to God's call in my life. That's not what I'm talking about, yo. I'm talking about surrendering to the sovereignty of God over your next breath, your next test, all your future. Rest under His hand. That's where the humility is. Letting God be God and you be you. All right, number 2. You're like, wow, where did you get this next point from? Cast your cares. How do you humble yourself before God? You rest under His hand and then you cast your cares on Him. To cast means to throw. The picture is of someone placing a heavy load they are carrying on the shoulders of another. Here's the big idea. Humble people take all of their anxious thoughts and worries, and instead of letting them swirl around and around in their minds over and over again until you're paralyzed by them, you take them one by one and you throw them on to God. If you think your worry and anxiety like bricks in your backpack, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to get down on your knees, open up your backpack of worry and anxiety, and one by one you take out those bricks and you just throw them at God. God, I'm not going to carry this worry anymore. I'm not going to be anxious about this anymore. It's yours, God. I'm resting under your mighty hand. I'm going to give you my stuff. I'm going to let you carry what I'm worried about. Yes, some of you are like, dude, that sounds too simple. But so often in the Christian life, it is the simple, God-given practices that we need most in order to grow in Christ. I want you to know that there is no magic formula in the Christian life. God doesn't zap us into maturity. Sometimes He heals us miraculously, but He always uses process to mature us. Yeah. How long's that process? Till you're dead. When will I be done with it? When you're in the ground. That's when it's over. God is a God of process. And yet He gives us these tried and true ways to relate to Him, like prayer. Casting your anxiety on God through prayer is exactly what Paul tells us to do in Philippians 4. You know this verse. Do not be anxious about anything, But in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Humility is giving your anxiety to God and refusing to believe He's not with you and not strong enough to help you. And number 3, and finally, how do you humble yourself before God? This is huge. This is enormous. I love how simply Peter puts it. He cares for you. Embrace the fact that God cares for you. Here's what is the most comforting reality about this verse. Peter tells us that it's safe to humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God, cast our cares on Him, because we serve a God who is not distant, aloof, cruel, or impersonal. We serve a God who genuinely cares for us down to the number of hairs on our head. For Him, it's not hard to count mine. Like, do you understand the level of care and the detail of care that God has over your life? Down to the number of hairs on your head. We serve a God who genuinely cares for us, who knows that we are wound up with worry and easily dominated by anxiety. We serve a God who deeply loves us and is inviting us out of the charade of self-importance and being control freaks. We serve a God who wants us to live in the glorious freedom of His tender-hearted, fatherly care for us. God cares for you, and if you believe that, you can put worry, fear, and anxiety to death. And no, this is not a one-time event. This is a daily decision to humble yourself and remind your heart that you are not God and He is in control and you aren't. That's why if you're going to battle anxiety in the way that Peter tells us to, it means you're going to have to preach to your own heart. Some of you are like, I'm not a preacher. Oh, yes, you are. You preach to you more than anyone else does. You know you're always having an internal dialogue with yourself, right? You're like, oh, is that what that voice inside my head is? Yes! It's the Spirit. Could be you. You need to preach to yourself. Think about this. You need to talk the truth to you. Here's what that looks like. Here's how you preach to yourself. You say, self, who do you think you are to be afraid of the future and ignore the promises of God? No, fearful self. I will not exalt myself with anxiety and overestimate my own importance today with pride-laced worry. Self, I'm going to humble myself under the powerful hand of my Father who loves me and find peace and even joy in the reality that God cares for me. You got to preach to your heart. You got to tell your heart the truth. And I'm not telling you to be tough. I'm telling you to live in the truth and require yourself to do so. Hold yourself accountable for living in the truth about who you are before God. A child of God who is deeply loved and cared for, who we serve a God who deeply knows every one of our needs. And catch this, He's got it covered. He's got it covered. Why? Oh, how do I know He's got it covered? Oh, 1 Peter 5:7, part B. He cares for you. And when you doubt God's care for you, there is always one place to look to remind your heart that He does. And it's simply this. We see how much God cares for us by looking at the cross. You ever doubt the love and the care and the affection of God over your life? What do? You look at the cross. I'll close with this. Romans 8:28 through 32. Here we go. You know the first part of this verse. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him. So what's God doing right now if you love God? What's God doing right now? He's working for your good. Who have been called according to his purpose. Do you love Jesus Christ? If the answer is yes, you've been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those he predestined, he also called. Those he called, he also justified. Those he justified, he also glorified. And then Paul says this, what then shall we say in response to all this? If God is for us, who can be against us? And then listen to Paul's logic about if God is for us, then who could be against us? Why do we need to believe that God is for us, that God cares for us? Listen, God who did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? Do you know what Paul's logic is? God sent Jesus Christ to die for us, to meet our deepest need, sin, distance from God. And Paul's like, hey, if you ever think that God is not for you, have you ever felt like God's not for you? I have. About 150,000 times during disappointing, difficult seasons of my life. God, where are you? I graduated from Bible college. 2 days after I graduated here, my wife was pregnant with our first son, Joseph. Went to the doctor for an appointment to see how the baby was doing. My first son, congenital heart defect. 2 weeks in the hospital, open heart surgery as a newborn. God, really? My second-born daughter, my first-born daughter, Lucy Grace. We call her Lucy Grace with a beautiful face. Didn't start walking till she was 18, 19, 20 months old. Something was going on with her. Found out that Lucy has a long-term, lifelong, unless God heals her, disability. She has a hard time getting around. She has something called pseudoachondroplasia. God, what's happening? Isn't one kid with a health problem enough? We didn't need two. Do you know I've been to every children's hospital in this area multiple times? They know us there. You will face a time in your life when you will question if God cares, and you will get worried and anxious, and what you need to do to face that is preach Jesus Christ to your heart. He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. He is going to show up 100% of the time. He is going to hold your hand through the fire. He is going to be with you on the mountaintop, and he will weep with you in the valley, and he cares for you. How do we know? Because God didn't spare his Son. He will certainly give you all that you need. So worry, anxiety, and fear can die in the presence of Jesus. We're just going to take a few minutes just to be quiet before the Lord. Brandon will close us when we're done. You can respond in whatever way you feel like you need to respond. Maybe you're here and you're just like, hey, I just need to reaffirm that I trust God. Maybe you just want to worship God for who he is today. But take some time now. Respond to the Lord. respond to his care